Let's get into the mess in the Middle East.
All right, Alexander, let's talk about the situation with the war in Iran. We have this report about video briefs given to Trump. And these video briefs are meant to present a picture of the war where the United States is crushing Iran and obliterating everything.
Yeah. I don't know what's going on in the White House right now, but I think Trump is out of touch with with the situation. We would never have gone into this war if he really knew all the implications to what bombing the supreme leader of Iran would unleash.
And this was run by NBC News. They're the ones that are reporting this. May explain Trump's rhetoric to a certain extent, but the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Trump is looking for a quick exit out of this war. A 4 to 6 week timeline was what he had in mind.
He wanted to be out after the first weekend. He thought they would be just like the strike last year, where we bombed their nuclear sites and there was a done deal and he could move on, claim victory. That's what he wanted this time. But you can't bomb the supreme leader and all the leadership of Iran and then think it's going to be over quickly. It's just a pipe dream.
When this war started, and we're coming up to the 5th week, I believe the 5th week is what we're coming up to. So we have that news, and then we have Axios saying that the Trump White House is looking for a decisive final blow to Iran, a big strike that will be fast and quick and decisive and will lead to the end of the war and victory for Trump.
The way that happened is Trump has been telling his military advisors, find me a way out of it, do something, end this. Force them to the negotiating table. And the U.S. military has tried to deliver, and we're shipping troops for operations on the ground in order to do this big strike. And because basically the U.S. military is being forced into an operation with, at this point, 3 weeks preparation, maybe four by the time it launches, it's, even if you're the greatest military on earth, if you're forced into a situation where everything is aligned against you, like an operation with no prep time against entrenched foe that has lots of modern weapons, including FPV drones, it's not going to end well. So probably there might be fireworks this weekend if some type of ground operation begins.
What do you make of all of this news?
Well, we have an awful lot of pieces of information that are flying around. We've had talks about negotiations, talks about ceasefires, talks about...
And we have negotiations too.
15-point plans, which may or may not exist. The Iranians say they haven't received it. And and Catherine Levitt said, you mustn't believe all that you hear, apparently, about 15-point plans. We've had deployments of... paratroopers, people from the 82nd Airborne Division. We've got talk about massive strikes. We had contradictory stories in the Wall Street Journal. We've had this report from NBC. It is important to hold on to the point that we made before the conflict began, because this, to my mind, provides the key to understanding everything. Now, the whole point about the war was to try to create a political crisis in Iran.
Yep. It was for regime change. It was a Venezuela moment. We kill a supreme leader, protesters rise up and form a pro-Western, pro-US democracy instantly, and we have peace in the Middle East. And Trump is heralded as the savior. That was the pipe dream that launched this war.
To provoke some kind of regime change crisis in Iran, that people who are denying it now, but all you have to do is wheel back and read the kind of things that Trump was saying.
Oh, absolutely. That first weekend, the fact that after bombing the Ayatollah by Saturday night, Trump administration was putting out ceasefire feelers via Italy. That is proof that there was no plan. There was no plan at all if regime change didn't work. That it was when I first heard about those Trump asking for a ceasefire, that's when I knew he was fucked in the Middle East.
And the battle started. And to do that quickly within not 4 weeks, as people are saying now, but within 48, 72, 96 hours. That was the sort of time frame. And the point that we made before the war.
Another proof that there was no plan in this Iran war is the fact that there was no plan to deal with the Strait of Hormuz closure. If they thought it was going to be a quick, 2-day war, 4-day war, and that's why there was no plan to deal with the Strait of Hormuz closure, no mobilization of troops to try to open it, because that's what you need. You need at least 100,000, probably 200,000, to take the entire Iranian coast. Let's open this. Which you need huge hundreds of miles of Iranian coast to secure the Straits of Hormuz. And you need probably 200,000 troops. And that takes at least 200,000 would take at least 10 months to, it wouldn't be ready by the midterms. And yeah, it's a mess.
Actually started is that this had to succeed quickly, very quickly, because if it didn't, if the Iranian government held together, if Iran was able to continue fighting, if there was no sign that the army was fracturing and turning against the Ayatollahs, if there was no sign that there were protests on the streets or a breakdown within the government, then with every day that it passed, with every week that it passed, the risk was for Trump that Iran would start to get stronger and would start to gain the initiative. And the United States, which is short of precision-guided weapons, as we've discussed many times, which has to face concerns about the situation in the global economy, which is all sorts of other issues and other problems.
It's the election year, midterms coming up. Yeah, Trump can't afford the Strait of Hormuz to remain closed for 10 months. But he has no way to open them because he didn't prepare for it. Opening Strait of Hormuz is something you need, ideally a year ahead of time, to mobilize troops and figure out a strategy. Maybe have set up some type of insurgency within Iran to work with your troops when you go in. That extremely helpful. It's not something you can do when all of your bases in the Middle East have been bombed into a state where they no longer can work. 13 U.S. bases uninhabitable. Pentagon admits much of Iran war overseen by personnel working remotely. I mean, all our bases in the Middle East have been leveled. That's basically the truth of it. And all of these. See all of this? Bahrain, Qatar, all these air bases, they're no longer working. That's why Saudi Arabia recently gave U.S. permission to use this air base all the way over here, because all the closer ones are basically inoperable. It's a bad situation.
That the United States would start to lose the initiative and things would begin to get more and more difficult. And eventually we would move from a position where the United States was appearing strong and successful to one where, on the contrary, it began to look like a debacle. And that is the situation we are in now. After several weeks of missile strikes, of attacks on Iran, of decapitation strikes on many Iranian leaders,
and Trump,
the government of Iran,
and Trump has tried to get out of this. He's given authorization to attack a desalination plant in Iran to put pressure on them. But Iran then retaliated by destroying one in Bahrain. And that scared him, and none of those have been attacked again. He attacked the oil in near Tehran, an oil depot, and they turned around and attacked oil facilities in the Gulf. Then they attacked the LNG facility, the gas facility Iran has, and Iran turned around and destroyed a big portion of the one Qatar. And so he's realized that anything he does to Iran could just turn around due to the Gulf states, and that just makes it worse in the energy markets. And so his ability to escalate his way out of this is limited, because it doesn't matter if the Strait of Hormuz is opened or not if everything that produces oil in the Gulf is destroyed.
Political system is still functioning. The country continues to work and function. There is no sign of a political collapse. The Iranians have imposed a tight control over the Strait of Hormuz. Energy prices around the world are, well, either rising or being manipulated downwards. But of course, keeping oil prices and energy prices low at a time when there is a worldwide shortage.
It encourages overconsumption. If prices are too low for supply and demand, then people consume more than they need to, that they would if the price was higher. And that worsens the shortage later. And that is exactly what's happening right now. I watched it happen in the past. U.S. financial system cannot survive drastic, unpredictable swings in commodity prices. So oil is being held down to prevent chaos in derivative markets. But maybe a few weeks from now or sooner, oil prices will finally be allowed to rise. And then gas prices will really start to go up.
Simply aggravates the shortage, because then people will stockpile whilst the price remains low, which will mean that in a few weeks or months' time, the shortage is going to be even greater.
Yep.
And the prices are...
Oil prices will go up over 150. And it'll be a sharp rise, probably in a month or two.
Going to rise even higher. There are also problems across global supply chains. And, well, we see that the Gulf monarchies are in crisis as well. So Trump needs to end the war fast. This is his priority now. He may be listening to 2-minute videos from the Pentagon, which is, by the way, if it's true.
And it's not going to end soon, because fundamentally, Trump and those in Iran have very different objectives. Iran wants this to be seen by the entire world as a loss for Trump. And Trump wants the entire world to see this as a victory for himself. That is ultimately, you can throw everything else aside, the fundamental problem right now. Iran cannot afford for the Trump to bomb its supreme leader, and then for Trump to come away from this having looked like he accomplished a victory. That would be the worst scenario for Iran. And Trump, for his part, after bombing the supreme leader and unleashing this chaos in the global economy with closure of the Strait of Hormuz, he cannot walk away from this without having accomplished something that he can claim as a victory. So you have two sides that are at polar opposites, there's no even anywhere near common ground between the two of them. So this is why it's going to go, the crisis, this war in Iran, is not ending soon.
And I'm sure it is true. It is very, very concerning. It's concerning about him that he is satisfied with just 2-minute videos. It is even more concerning about the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff that instead of insisting on giving briefings to the Commander-in-Chief and informing him about what is actually going on, they are palming 2-minute videos upon him. I mean, it really speaks very badly about the situation in the Pentagon. But anyway, we can get distracted by those stories.
Yes. Pete Hegseth bears a huge amount of blame for all this.
The political imperative is to bring the war to a conclusion quickly, in a way that limits any political damage.
But that's impossible. That's what I said. I said even before this war began that if you bomb Supreme Leader, there is no off-ramp. There is no ending this war in a victory for Trump. No. Iran will never let that happen.
Which enables Trump to say that this was all worthwhile and that it achieved something. So what they're trying to do, and they can't decide on doing one or the other, they're trying to do both at the same time, is that they're trying to draw the Iranians into negotiations. They're coming up with plans.
Why they're doing this is because really realistically, the only way to open Strait of Hormuz is if the Iranians agree to open the Strait of Hormuz. That means somehow diplomatically. Because military options aren't realistic.
Proposals. They're talking about ceasefires. They're talking about all of those sort of things. And at the same time, they're talking about a massive, overwhelming strike that is finally going to achieve the outcome that they want, that's going to push the Iranians either to break down or to sue for peace and to accept American terms. There's talk about deploying troops, seizing Hardag Island, or if not Hardag Island, one of the islands in the Strait of Hormuz.
And there are stories about the Iranians fortifying Karg Island and all of these places where the Marines might land. And apparently there have been shipments of FPV drones from Russia to Iran. And yeah, we're going anywhere we land, we'll be dealing with drones. That's for sure.
All of those things.
And that will be terrible, terrible for Trump. Because you're going to have videos. And videos like this. Just use this as a way of imagining it.
A Russian FPV drone spots a Ukrainian
Just imagine its soldier being U.S. soldier and the drone being Iranian drone.
soldier moving through a forest and quickly locks onto the target. Within seconds, the situation turns critical as the drone closes in, leaving little chance to escape.
And the entire world will be watching dozens of U.S. soldiers, maybe even hundreds, dying to drone footage like this in a way that is impossible to hide. That's what happens the moment any type of ground operation begins in Iran.
The imperative is to get the war ended as quickly as possible before further damage is done, and hope that if the war ends and the Strait of Hormuz reopens and all of those oil tankers start to move, well, that will give you a few months cushion as all of that oil is released into the global energy system, which will get you perhaps through the midterms. And it will also provide you with some time and space.
I agree. If Trump could miraculously, right now, get the Strait of Hormuz open, yeah, he might still be okay in the midterms. Yes, right now, there's been the disruption only 4 weeks, but it's realistically more than that in a few areas because oil facilities have been struck, LNG facilities have been struck. But still, if everything was opened right now, there would be a breath of release. Trump would still be okay in the midterm. The worst of the inflation would be avoided, the worst of the damage to the global economy. But that's never going to happen.
To get production in the Gulf up and running again. So it is time. Time is now the factor that is running out and which is causing all of these strange moves.
Agreed. Trump, the time has been on Iran's side ever since it closed the Strait of Hormuz. And now, every day that passes, Iran is closer to victory. See, Iran, 6 months. Holds the Strait of Hormuz closed 6 months. It wins. It'll cost Republicans the midterms. Trump gets impeached. Regime change in the United States caused by Iran. And from that point on, the entire world will have seen the decision to strike the Ayatollah as Trump's fatal mistake that brought an end to his presidency. A total Iranian victory. All it has to do, hold the Strait of Hormuz closed for 6 months. And we just don't have any realistic way to stop that because we didn't mobilize any troops for an operation on the ground before this began. We only started mobilizing troops like a few days after we killed the supreme leader. So there's no way we can put together a big enough ground force to secure the huge coastline that Iran has.
By the president, Donald Trump, and his officials.
This entire area needs to be taken to secure the Strait of Hormuz. That's hundreds of miles. You need like 200,000 troops. And you need to start preparing a year ahead of time to launch that type of operation. If Trump had prepared a year ahead of time, had 200,000 troops ready to go when he bombed the Ayatollah, he might have opened the Strait of Hormuz soon enough to avoid a disaster during the midterms. But that's not the world we live in. The world we live in is the one where Trump had nothing at all prepared to deal with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah, but that is the problem that the Trump administration has right now is that they want to finish the war militarily. So they're talking about a big decisive strike. And at the same time, they're trying to figure out a way to enter negotiations, but those negotiations have to be framed as an Iranian capitulation.
Yes.
You can't have both.
Yep.
You can't go to the opposition or your enemy, whoever you're at war with, and say, okay, we're going to destroy you, we're going to crush you militarily, but we also want to negotiate with you. And during those negotiations, can you please, surrender to us, if you don't mind? I mean, that's basically what's happening.
You have put your finger.
It's absolutely absurd. Yes, Trump still right now, although his position has infinitely weakened, because right now the entire world has seen Iran close the Strait of Hormuz and the U.S. be absolutely powerless against it for 4 weeks, basically. At that point in time, yeah, the cards are in the Iranian side. They're not going to surrender to Trump now.
On the exact problem. And that's why we're getting all this dissonance and all these contradictory statements and all of this feverish activity.
This happens when someone believes something that doesn't conform to reality. Trump believed he could have this victory in Iran. He thought that he'd bomb the supreme leader, he'd get democracy and pro-U.S. regime now in Iran, a puppet U.S. state, basically, and he'd be seen as the savior. That's the vision he had going into this. And the reality is such a stark difference from that, that he still can't accept it.
At least they're going to try, and this is my own view, they're going to try over the next few days to do something in the war which they hope will tip the Iranians into peace talks on American terms, because it's looking increasingly unlikely that they're going to get regime collapse. And if
that was going to happen, it would have happened within the first 48 hours. Now that I just say that's off of the table, there's zero chance of it now.
If you take the 15-point plan seriously, and by the way, there are contradictions in it. I mean, it's clearly been cobbled together in an enormous hurry without anybody thinking about it. So one section says that Iran can continue enrichment on its own territory, but at extremely low levels. And another section says that Iran must hand over all of its enriched uranium to the IAEA and have it taken out of the country. So you can see this isn't even thought through.
It's a copy and paste of the Russian peace plan in some parts as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just bizarre, actually. I mean, it's bizarre how
Trump's presidency ended when he bombed the Ayatollah, and everything is Trump trying to do everything in his power to not accept that fact. He's just going around proclaiming victory since day one. Victory then, victory now. We still won. We won completely. We're winning so hard. We keep on winning. Meanwhile, every day the Strait of Hormuz is closing. That's Iran winning.
They're trying to bring in some of the points that the Russians are making to try to apply them to the Iranians. And you're even starting, which is I find almost beyond belief, you're even starting to get some American officials and some pro-US, pro-Trump commentators actually starting to say, well, this is like the SMO, and we're approaching it in the way that Putin approached the SMO in Ukraine, and that there are similarities and parallels. I mean, there are no similarities. And
they have no understanding of the SMO. Even to this day, they have no understanding of the conflict in Ukraine. That's what it shows.
Absolutely
completely ignorant about what happened.
I mean, Trump hasn't handled the conflict in Ukraine well either, and he's just let it drag on, and Ukraine is going to end up getting fucked much harder in the end, because it is probably going to lose Odessa and become a landlocked country with zero power or future. That's likely outcome to Ukraine, especially after Trump decided to launch this Iran war. So, if he had actually pressured Ukraine into accepting a deal last summer, for example, Ukraine might have still been able to remain as a functioning country. That's practically off the table at this point.
Happened in Ukraine.
Correct. But as I said, they're cobbling things together in a hurry. I mean, that 15-point plan, and by the way, the Russians have sneered at it. They've said, there's all these American plans. We've had all sorts of American plans over Ukraine. We haven't seen most of them. It looks to us it's exactly the same as happening over Iran. It's there's all sorts of.
It's an administration run on wishful thinking. These are plans. This is what we would like our enemies to accept, though we don't have the power. The balance of power is completely in their favor, but we want them to accept these points that are entirely in the U.S. favor.
American plans all flying around. At the same time, I mean, Trump does understand that if he's going to talk to the Iranians, he's got to talk in a way that the Iranians finally feel that they're talking to serious people. So he's now pushing or pretending to push Witkoff and Kushner to one side. So he's bringing out finally Vance and Rubio. And I mean, this is clearly intended to make the Iranians take the bait, to agree to talk. But
They won't. They're just so fed up at this point. Man, I think they're going to wait till Vance is president to start negotiating.
But at the same time, it has to be a negotiation in which he comes out in some way the winner. So it's no longer regime change. And that's not even in the 15-point plan. There's no radical changes or reforms in the way that Iran is governed anymore. That's all actually there. It's all back to nuclear enrichment and ballistic missiles and that sort of thing, the sort of thing that the Iranians were prepared to make significant.
He's already given up on regime change if he's in his desperation to bring this to an end.
Concessions about before the war started. It's an attempt to go back to that scenario to get a ceasefire, which is becoming.
Oh, and I will mention this news that broke recently that is relevant. Trump delays Iran attack deadline by another 10 days. So another taco moment for Trump. Trump always chickens out.
Increasingly imperative because of the crisis in the energy system, the hope that a ceasefire will lead to an opening of the Strait of Hormuz. It will give the US some time to restock its missile arsenals. To prepare for the next round. They're talking about.
Yes, the goal is still regime change. That's even now. If Iran agreed to any type of ceasefire, U.S. would just rearm itself and get ready to strike Iran again, hoping this time it would cause the desired regime change. That's why if Iran has any brain at this point in time, those there, they would they just keep the Strait of Hormuz closed till Trump gets impeached.
A 1 month ceasefire. But at the same time, since they know by now that the Iranians are not going to agree to any of this, they have to try and escalate the pressure. And so we have the deployments of the 82nd.
But ultimately, they can't escalate the pressure. They've tried. Anything they bomb in Iran, Iran turns around and bombs in the Gulf states and increases the pressure on Trump instead. And so this, whatever ground operation is going to be Trump's Hail Mary pass to try to force Iran into negotiations. And a lot of Americans are probably going to die to FPV drones.
The airborne division, the talk of crushing blows against the Iranians, the seizure of islands in the Persian Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, all of that. So everything contradicts everything else. Everything is in chaos. The Iranians, for the moment, are being completely uncooperative. They say that they were fooled, they were tricked, deceived by Trump twice. They're not prepared to be deceived a third time. They're sticking to their demands, which we've discussed in previous programs.
Their demands would be seen as a complete Trump loss, so he can't accept their demands.
Which are so sweeping that they would amount to a political and geostrategic revolution in the Middle East, which it is impossible for Trump to accept. I mean,
it's possible for Trump to accept, his presidency is over if he accepts those demands, Iranian demands. But his presidency is going to be over either way, just take longer. Strait of Hormuz will bring the same result via midterm and impeachment. If he agrees to these Iranian demands right now, some Republicans would cross the aisle and help Democrats impeach him. So he'd be impeached immediately. But if he just drags this out, Strait of Hormuz remain closed 6 months, Democrats impeach him after the midterms. So everything ends in impeachment.
Politically, the damage to him if he accepted those sort of terms, I mean, it's just, I would say, unsurvivable. So he's gambling. He has to gamble that this big crushing strike.
He has to gamble. This is what I've been saying for the alternatives. First one, again, he can't accept it, is giving in to Iranian demands, which would be political suicide immediately. Second one is to twiddle his thumbs and just wait while Iran holds the Strait of Hormuz closed and he loses midterms and is impeached. The third option is a Hail Mary pass He tries to send in some type of groups on the ground. It ends up very badly for those troops on the background because they're being put in against a very tough enemy that has decades to prepare, while they're being sent in on this makeshift operation that's been planned in a matter of weeks. Yeah. So, and it'll ultimately bring Trump closer to impeachment, but I don't think he can psychologically just sit around twiddling his thumbs while his presidency crumbles around him. So he's going to try this Hail Mary pass, even though it's going to make things worse for him. 90% chance it's going to make things worse for him.
Egypt, Hard Island, and something else is finally going to be enough to get the Iranians to talk and to deliver something that he could sell to the American people and to the world as a success that will justify all the harm and all of the damage that has been done. So, as I said, you have all of these things going on, all of these different parts moving around. But if you keep your mind on the single picture, the simple picture, and the imperative of time, it all makes sense. Now, just to add to the time issues, I had a number of discussions both with someone from China yesterday and with two people in the UK. And they're both telling me that over the last couple of days, China has started to tighten export restrictions, exports, or reduce exports.
Yep. So Strait of Hormuz closed 3.5 weeks ago. Now it's starting to kick in. Now we went over that yesterday. There's places where oil is getting in short supply. You have places like China that are putting in restrictions. Those restrictions that China is putting in place now will aggravate the shortages from the Strait of Hormuz. And in 1 or 2 weeks from now, the people are really going to start feeling the pain
of rare earths and of other strategic minerals. So the Chinese, without making any announcement, they never make announcements about this sort of thing, but they are now starting to take action. They've already stopped exports of refined oil products, petrol and diesel, which is having an immense effect across East Asia. And they're now starting to take these further steps as well. And reserves of some of these materials are apparently very short. So that is also putting further time pressure on Trump, assuming this information I have got is true.
Yep.
I don't know if there's time left, Alexander, if there's much time left. The casino's about to close. Trump is at the table and he wants to continue to bet and try to find a way to win, leave the casino with some money in his pocket, but looks like...
No, Trump was finished the moment he dropped that bomb on the Supreme Leader. He didn't know it, but what he was bombing when he killed the Supreme Leader was his presidency, his political career, his legacy. All went up in smoke with the Ayatollah.
The casino's about to close. Boots on the ground is a possibility. I would actually say it's more likely that we're going to have boots on the ground.
No, it is inevitable. It is inevitable. You have Trump screaming at generals and Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War now. Fix this. Get us out. Make them talk to us. Get me out of this. He knows this is destroying his political career. And the military is going to have to try. They're going to have to try something in response to these demands from Trump. And they're going to put together the best plan they can come up with to open the Strait of Hormuz, propose it to him, and he's going to say, do it. And we're going to have troops on the ground. And for the first time in history, U.S. troops are going to be thrown into a battlefield with FPV drones in huge quantities. And hundreds of Americans are going to die.
There was a House meeting the other day, and various members of the House left that meeting shocked. Yes. My understanding is that they were told that there's going to be some sort of an operation.
Yes.
An invasion, boots on the ground, taking an island, some sort of an operation, which will require American troops to be in Iran or to be in one of the islands that they're looking to seize. And my other impression from the various posts on X from members of the House is that there is no plan. That's why
Yeah, there's no plan. I agree completely with that. No, there is no plan, and there is a plan. There is, ever since they bombed Supreme Leader and ever since the Strait of Hormuz was closed, Trump has been screaming at military, figure out some way to open it. And military is scrambling, putting together plan after plan. You remember the arming the Kurds? That idea was floated around for a while. It died because it wasn't possible. There's no plan from way back then. There is just winging it. And at the same time, there is some idea of using these troops somewhere in Iran. Some military operation. But it isn't set in stone. It's all being cobbled together. There is no hard plan.
And Trump says we're on schedule, and everyone asks, well, what's the schedule? Right? We're on schedule to meet all our objectives. The Pentagon says, or Trump says, and everyone asks, well, what are the objectives? What's the schedule? Yeah. He doesn't know. There's no schedule. There are no real objectives.
That's not the truth. There was a schedule. There was a plan. There was a wishful thinking. Bomb the supreme leader, regime change, pro-U.S. puppet government gets put into place, and Iran gets turned into a U.S. puppet state. That was the wishful thinking that led us into this war. And ever since the first 24 hours when that didn't happen and Trump started seeking a ceasefire, from that point on, there was no plan.
Objectives that they're going after. The objective was regime change. That was it.
Yes, exactly.
So they don't really say what they're trying to do on the one hand, and then
but they can't admit that. Trump can't admit that his real objective was regime change, because that's the one thing that's right now, it's obvious to everyone, is completely off the table. It's not going to happen. The chance of regime change at this point is zero. So if Trump admits that that's his objective, he's basically already conceding defeat.
On the other side, they're saying, oh, we're way ahead of schedule. Well, what was the schedule? What is the schedule? What are the objectives? What are the goals? What are you trying to do now that you haven't gotten regime change? And before you answer, Alexander, it's also not very simple, because you're not only dealing with the United States and Iran, you also have Israel in there as well. And that complicates everything.
And there's a chance that Netanyahu is injured or dead. That's another wrinkle to all this.
Everything. For the United States and for Iran. So you have Israel there, which has completely different goals.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And I should say I endorse your point. And I think your analogy of the compulsive gambler at the table trying constantly to win back some of his money by raising his stakes, he's putting up his bids all the time, even as the casino is about to close, is exactly right. That is exactly.
Honestly, I think Trump thought he'd be able to get out of this war in Iran. He thought he could just, if it'd been any other country in the world, like Venezuela or whatever, it wouldn't matter. He could attack them without authorization from Congress or any public support or any. He could just tackle out and, it'd be fine. But Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. So Iran was the one country in the world you cannot tackle out of. You cannot just bomb the supreme leader and just say, oh, call it victory and just, go on your merry way. Trump didn't understand that, and that's why his political career is over.
The situation that we are in. And that is why those people from Congress, including Republicans, by the way, were so upset with one Republican Congresswoman, absolutely Nancy Mace, absolutely furious with Lindsey Graham, who she clearly sees as the person who's lured the president into this disaster. And
yes, any Republican, like anyone like me, I am. The reason I'm furious with Trump is because he was doing, there are domestic things that he was doing that I support, that I want him to focus on. This is a huge distraction, and it's going to destroy his presidency. It's going to set Republicans back. It's going to hand Congress to Democrats. I hate everything of that. And Trump is the one responsible for it. So yes, I am not... he's wiped out a ton of... nearly everything good that he's done by how much he's just hurt the Republicans and his own domestic agenda.
Well, there it is. And I think that is exactly right. I would add something else, just because I've got little to respond to from your point, because I think the way you set it out is so exactly right. But I would add something else, which is, let's say they capture one of these islands. Let's say they capture Harg Island or some of these other islands. First of all, I cannot see...
Again, we live in the age of drone warfare.
Out by
you have any troops on an island near the coast of Iran, we go watching videos like this every day that we occupy it, of drones coming in, flying in, swooping down, and killing U.S. troops. That's what happens if we occupy any islands off Iran's coast.
Myself, I mean, maybe there's some explanation as to why capturing an island here or an island there is going to open the Strait of Hormuz. I don't see it myself.
Again, Iran smells the blood in the water. They know if they hold the Strait of Hormuz closed 6 months, Trump is finished. They know that. They for first time, I think, in maybe 100 years, something, we have a foreign country who is at war with us, who has a clear path to victory. Hold the Strait of Hormuz closed 6 months. And the United States hasn't mobilized any troops, so they have nothing in their power to stop that. We can't get, even if we wanted to, we can't mobilize enough troops to hold this entire coastline. Plus, Trump started this war with low public support, which means we have no tolerance for casualties. No tolerance for casualties in the era of drone warfare, which drone warfare slows everything down. It means you can't use vehicles. It means that everything has to be painfully taken inch by inch in terms of territory. So, in the era of drone warfare, there's no way to secure this coast, even if we had enough troops. Even if we had the political will for the amount of casualties that would be required to take this coast. Just because there was no preparation by the president for dealing with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
All I see is that the Iranians can respond by doing all kinds of things. They can start seeding the seas with mines, which they supposedly started to do in a small way, where they could escalate that. They could do all kinds of things. But
apparently, from what I know, they have mined this area here, right here. So there is still a pathway for ships to go through by hugging the Iranian coast. Which is smart from their perspective. They mined the area that they have the least control over, this area right here, and that way they could force all the ships to pass right next to them, and where they're easy targets. So that's the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. It is mined, but it's not totally mined. It's only this area right here.
I was reading in the British media yesterday that seizing an island is going to make even greater sets of problems. Because if you seize the island, you have to hold it. That will result, obviously, in casualties. But
yes, but Trump is screaming at people over there in the White House, fix this, make them capitulate, do something. And the U.S. military is going to try to do something. The something might make everything worse for Trump, but it's going to have to try to do something.
But more importantly, inevitably, what's going to happen is that much of this aviation, this missile power, all of the rest, which currently is attacking targets inside Iran, is going to have to be diverted in order to protect those American troops on that island. So, in fact, it's going to divert your resources onto what might be, in some respects, an unimportant strategic position, trying to hold on to a target of only symbolic.
Well, for the record, what he's talking about, they're talking about maybe taking this island here. One thing I've heard that I really believe in, one plan that the UAE is definitely on board with, is trying to take over these islands here, and then US would give control over the islands here to the United Emirates afterwards, and that's their plan to open Strait of Hormuz. It doesn't work because all this entire coastline and the mountains behind it needs to be captured. Otherwise, the Iranians can still just shoot ships. And they've mined, apparently, the center. So the other plan is to go up here after Kurg Island, which Iran uses to export its oil. And the idea is to use this as leverage to force Iran to open the Strait of Hormuz. Frankly, I don't think it'll work because, as I said, Iran knows it holds the Strait of Hormuz closed 6 months. They win. They topple a U.S. president. Why would they give that up? Even if they lose their oil for 6 months, that's a small price to pay for bringing down a U.S. president. So I don't think even Kurg Island gives Trump the leverage to open the Strait of Hormuz. And trying to actually take these islands, oh my God, look how close to the coast it is. And with all the drones Iran has, it's impossible because this war is already unpopular in the United States. You start having drone footage of hundreds of U.S. troops dying as we take these islands. Yeah. Yes, I just don't think
Symbolic
it's
value, an
possible.
island of very symbolic value. Whilst, of course, the Iranians would be free to continue their strikes right across the Middle East. Articles today all over the British media, by the way, about drone deliveries from the Russians to Iran, about the Russians sending more and more supplies to Iran. Of course, we have no independent corroboration of this, none. But for the record, I believe it is true, and I was looking.
I also believe it is true. Russia is angry about everything we've done in Ukraine, about all the attacks from Ukraine into Russia. They view that, they know it's really the United States and, you know, MI6 and the UK doing all these attacks. It's not, they're just using Ukraine as a vehicle to attack Russia. And sorry, here's Ukraine. I was not concentrating. And so Iran conflict is their opportunity for revenge. It's the West has used Ukraine as a proxy to attack Russia, and Russia is now using Iran as a proxy to attack the West. And I'm sure that it's very satisfying for a lot of Russian military officials who are angry.
Reading at what Peskov had to say in response to this, and he was saying, "Oh well, you know, there's all sorts of stories out there. You shouldn't believe everything you read."
That's basically what the United States and UK say every time a British drone or British missile goes and hits a target in Russia. They say, "We don't know. It wasn't us. It was the Ukrainians." That's what Russia's doing now. It's all these, even if it's Russia-made drones that go and hit U.S. bases in the Middle East. It's officially only Iran doing it.
Which is his way of avoiding giving a simple answer.
Well, the United States provided hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine, and they still do.
Yep,
They sell it to NATO. They don't.
And intelligence and targeting and satellite coverage and Starlink. Ukraine would have collapsed a long time ago if it was on its own. It would have not even lasted a year. In fact, there was an Istanbul agreement right after Russia invaded, where Ukraine and Russia came to an understanding that would have ended the war. Then Boris Johnson went over there and killed that agreement on behalf of United States and the West. And since then, we've had war. Well, if we weren't involved, there would not last 2.5 years of the war wouldn't have happened. Just saying. Entire country of Ukraine was sacrificed to the anti-Russia agenda.
Give it anymore, they sell it. Whatever. Who's Trump fooling with that, right?
Exactly.
They're still providing Ukraine with weapons, and of course all the intel and the targeting and, all of that stuff.
Yes.
You know, you had drones hitting Russia just the other day. Who's sending those drones?
Well, right, precisely.
Exactly.
You had
While we're in the middle of an energy crisis.
You had decapitations.
Yes, right now, even as we're in the middle of an energy crisis, Ukraine is attacking Russian oil infrastructure, making that crisis worse.
Strikes a few weeks ago against the president of Russia himself, because that was clearly what was happening,
So
despite all the denials. And absolutely, you're absolutely correct. I mean, so it's not surprising. It should surprise no one that for the Russians it's payback time.
Yeah.
Only they're getting their money back with interest, because this crisis is causing far more problems for the United States than the Russians have ever experienced in terms of that.
Oh yes. I mean, obviously, I've told you since he bombed the Ayatollah, Trump is finished. Putin is still around after 3 years of the Russia war. So he didn't start a war that would end him politically. And that's because the entire Russian establishment and the majority of the population was on board with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Unlike how Trump began this war against Iran.
Conflict.
And it's a conflict right on Russia's border that directly affects its national security. Unlike Trump, who's starting this war on the other side of the world.
In Ukraine. That's a controversial statement. We will discuss that in a further program. But we could see how all of these problems are compounding, and they will continue to compound the longer this conflict goes on.
It's causing a lot of problems around the world. This conflict.
Absolutely.
The Middle East is wrecked.
Middle East is
all
wrecked.
these countries, Dubai, everything that were built on, the UAE, Dubai, everything that were built on is now over, shattered.
Exactly.
Asia's a mess. Europe is going to be completely demolished.
Europe is going to be so wrecked by these high energy prices because they've cut themselves off from Russia, gas and oil. Now they're cut off from Middle East gas and oil. And in a few weeks, Trump, in order a desperate bid to save the midterms, is going to put export restrictions on U.S. gas and oil. And so where will Europe get its energy from? No, it won't. It's just going to be fucked. That's what's going to happen. You're going to have like a complete economic collapse in like Europe. And it's entirely self-inflicted. The Europeans got onto the anti-Russia bandwagon and piled into the war in Ukraine. And they did this to themselves. If Russia was still their ally, they'd be set with energy supplies from Russia. They would not have this problem.
From all of this, and the Europeans are doing nothing about it, nothing at all. Who is Trump talking to when he says we won or we're winning? My sense is that he's actually addressing Iran. Yeah, I almost think of it as
no. He's addressing his base. He's addressing people like Asmongold, like people like or Nux Taku, who listen to. I was watching Nux Taku the other day. He believes the president. He believes the president when he says we're winning, that they're negotiating. They've given in. Like that's who he's addressing. Asmongold, Nux Taku, and their audience, who are still somewhat on board with this, but I've seen the cracks in both Nux Taku and Asmongold regarding this. The beginning reality is setting in. It's taking its time. It took a little bit longer than I expected, but reality is setting in for them. It won't be long till I drag them over to my side, that the Iran war was an absolute disaster. Not long.
As a plea for help, or kind of a trick to try and convince Iran that you're losing. Like, we're winning, Iran. Come on. Don't you see it? We're winning. He keeps on saying it. I'm wondering, is he talking to the American people, or is he actually trying to convince Iran, trying to play some sort of mentalist mind game with constantly going on about winning? We're winning.
I think
no. It's definitely the Asmongold and Nux Takus of the world and their audience he's talking to, not Iran.
I think you're exactly right. I think that is exactly what he's trying to do. He's trying to get the Iranians to sit down and talk to him. I mean, he invented an entirely fictitious negotiation over the weekend, and I really want to repeat that again, because that is what
it's amazing. A fictitious negotiation. I agree. It was completely. They're not talking to anyone on the Iranian side.
What he did. I don't think anybody any longer, by the way, has any doubt about that. So I mean, he invented an entirely fictitious.
Look, messages are being passed on between the two countries. That's true, right? Yeah. Messages via third parties.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the extent of it. That's the extent of it.
That's it. That's all that's happened. Proper sit-down talks. They've not taken place, and they're not going to happen.
Who are you going to talk to?
Well, exactly.
Wouldn't a good move be to get rid of
anyone on the Iranian side that comes forward to go to these negotiations? They're just making themselves a target for Israel to bomb.
Wickoff and Kushner. Wouldn't that be a good signal?
Well, it would be an excellent signal. It would be an excellent signal. Sack them from all further negotiations, both over the Middle East and over...
Honestly, if Trump did that, it would go a little way towards making Iran at least open to talking. I mean, it's not going to change Iran's trajectory, or they make open straightforward moves, but they might actually send someone to negotiate with Trump and tell him to his face, these are demands, and these men, of course, you'll never accept them, so we're just going to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed till you get impeached.
Over Ukraine too, by the way.
But you don't even need to sack Kushner, because no one even knows what his position is.
What his role is.
What is he?
I know, but I mean, make it absolutely clear that he's no longer playing any further role in negotiations at all. And I mean, the other thing is to empower the vice president, who's managed to keep his distance from this debacle. I mean, he has up to now.
Yeah, Vance strikes me as someone who's very sensible, and that he was against this war means he's on the same page as me. So of course he's smart. No, I'm kidding.
think that means that the Iranians trust Vance. Obviously, they don't trust anybody. But here is what I think. I think the US ought to be doing at this time. They should forget about, seizing islands and all of those sort of things. They do need to get the war ended. They need to send someone, maybe Vance, to.
What U.S. should be doing if Trump was willing to sacrifice himself for the Republican Party and take the loss and negotiate with Iran and do the necessary concessions that would end his political career, because term in delayed duck, that could at least save Republicans in the midterms. I will say that. If Trump wanted to fall on the sword and, take the political damage for starting this war, and by doing that, open the Strait of Hormuz. Republicans might still survive the midterms if Trump did that. But Trump wouldn't. It would require, it'd be a political sacrifice on Trump's part. But that would be my ideal scenario: is Trump decides to sacrifice himself. Maybe J.D. Vance takes over, and Republicans don't get crushed in the midterms.
Moscow and Beijing.
It's a pipe dream. It's absolutely a pipe dream. So, but it's theoretically possible.
Those are the two countries that have leverage over Iran, and they ought to ask these two countries for help and try to get these two countries to set up negotiations, real negotiations between Iran and the US.
The problem with that is I think Trump is enough aware that even if he used Russia and China to set up negotiations with Iran, and I think Alex is right, he could do that. He knows that Iranian demands are so extreme that he could never agree to them politically. And so that's why he isn't doing it. That's why he wants to do some type of military operation to improve his bargaining position before relying on Russia and China to set up negotiations. That's my feeling.
This time, not between Arakshi and Witkoff and Kushner, but with real negotiators, people who understand these things, and negotiations that can be taken forward. And to be frank, if we go back to the original problem, the uranium enrichment issue, you have pointed out in program after program, on this channel, on other channels, in every place, that in fact we previously had a deal, the JCPOA. We could go back to something like that with additional safeguards, which the Iranians, if they would probably agree to.
Especially if you lift the sanctions.
And that's the other thing, you'd have to lift the sanctions. And of course, the Russians and the Chinese will demand a price.
Yep.
I mean, it'd be a price over Ukraine. It'll be a price over sanctions on Russia. But, well, that's the obvious step forward, the way to do this from this point on, moving forward. And by the way, if I can say, it would not be inconsistent with the kind of policies that Donald Trump promised to follow when he was elected president.
Yes. But I don't think it's politically viable right now, because the deep state, Israel, that nexus, deep state and Israel are the same in this particular case, won't let Trump have an off-ramp like this. They've set him up so that it would be political suicide to negotiate this way. They've painted Iran as absolute evil, and after that we need to take out their nuclear program, and for Trump we need to take out their leadership. I don't think Trump can do what they just suggested. The deep state won't allow it. Israel won't allow it.
But which, as we have seen, he has completely turned his back on.
Our final question. Is this a type of Suez moment, or could this become a type of Suez moment for the United States? I know there are comparisons made between the Suez and this, and there's a lot of differences. There are a lot of differences.
Yeah.
But in general, could this turn out to be?
It might be viewed in retrospect as the end of U.S. hegemony in the world, this Iran war. It might mark the definite turning point on that regard. Combined with the Ukraine war, which is also going to resolve in Russia's favor. Now it's guaranteed because of the Iran war and high energy prices, and U.S. weakening, having to send all its weapons to fight Iran instead of to Ukraine. So losing these two wars together, basically the West, it's going to have a drastic global ramifications.
A kind of Suez moment for the United States? In general.
Right. As a British person, I want to say something about Suez. Suez was the moment when the British Empire basically finished. It could have been, it should have been a massive galvanizing moment. It was an opportunity to put the empire behind and to focus on redeveloping Britain itself. And if you actually know anything about what happened in Britain in the late 50s and early 60s, there's actually quite a lot of discussion about that. There was an important speech by an academic called C.P. Snow. There were all sorts of proposals by, well, the man who eventually became Prime Minister, Harold Wilson. Nothing like that in the end happened. I mean, the British never really addressed their own problems in any coherent way. The United States, yes, it is a moment which they could treat as something like that. It would not be the kind of massive end to empire that Suez for Britain was, because Britain after Suez ceased to be a global power. The United States would still be a global power. Its resources...
Yes, no, it depends how Iran conflict ends. How much is the U.S. military's impotence will be exposed? Like, already interceptor stocks are running dry. If you have a couple of weeks of U.S. air defenses across the region failing totally, that changes perception of U.S. power around the world. And how humiliating is the final outcome of this Iran war going to be for the United States? It's very possible in the worst case scenario that the United States is completely forced out of the Middle East. And Israel, as a power in the region, is, let's just say, the dream of greater Israel is dead forever. That's a very realistic outcome to this Iran war. So it could, I think it could be a Suez moment, because not only is it Iran, it's also Ukraine, which is going to be resolved in Russia's favor as a result of what's happening in Iran. So it's going to be a 1-2 punch to U.S. And NATO supremacy, and the people will begin thinking of the United States as a paper tiger. The respect for U.S. military power will plummet. It will have a huge impact. I think it is equivalent to Suez Canal, because it maybe, okay, he's right, so maybe not as drastic, but I think in some ways it will be.
Are immensely greater than Britain's were, relatively speaking, after Suez. If the US were to treat this as a galvanizing moment, if they were to take a hard look, if they were to say, for example, well, maybe the US military as it's currently configured isn't really the kind of military we need anymore. Maybe this is the...
That's not possible, because the entire US financial system and US economy is based on the dollar hegemony over the world. It's based on banks outside the euro-dollar market. That means banks outside of the US that hold dollar accounts. It's based on the dollarization of a huge part of the world. That means you go to Afghanistan, they use the US dollar. You go to Somalia, they use US dollar. That's a huge part. Those dollars and the banks, euro dollars, those dollars outside the United States are kept in, is what allows us to fund our deficit. If U.S. power projection over the world fails drastically and falls, you're going to have places that de-dollarize. And if a big chunk of the world de-dollarizes, it will start an inflationary spiral that will destroy the U.S. financial system. And as soon as that process starts, the rest of the world, the places still using the U.S. dollar, are going to, as their dollar loses value rapidly, more and more of them will de-dollarize and switch to any other currency that's stable. And that inflationary spiral, U.S. economy, financial system is gone. The point is, there's no easy way to give up U.S. hegemony over the world. It's not like, okay, we can just resign ourselves to being a little bit less powerful and not dominating all these countries. And if we do that, it ends up with a death spiral for the U.S. economy and financial system. There is no off-ramp for the United States in terms of its power projection all over the world. But there's also no avoiding it's going to happen anyway. So, yeah, eventually, sometime probably 5 years, it will really start. There's going to be a really high inflation leading to the collapse of the dollar.
Moment to start doing what Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, by the way, was saying they would do when Trump was elected, and start coming to long-term agreements with the other superpowers, with the Chinese and the Russians. Maybe if the United States were finally to say, well, look, let's stop getting ourselves bogged down in the Middle East, then it would not be that exclamation mark full stop that Suez was for Britain in terms of Britain's global role. Maybe it would be a punctuation mark in which the United States moved from one situation as a global power to a different, much more sustainable one.
Like I just said, there is no downshifting for the United States. That's why. If you're wondering, if somewhat confused why we went all in this Iran war and we're not backing down on Ukraine, that's the underlying dynamic driving it, is because those high up in Treasury and the U.S. elite, the Epstein crowd, let's put it that way, the Epstein crowd knows that downshifting just leads to a inflationary spiral that destroys the financial system and the dollar. They know that. And so that's why they never consider an off-ramp. They're all in Ukraine, they're all in Iran, is because the only hope to avoid that death spiral for the United States is to somehow achieve victory in these places. And it's not going to happen, but they're trying.
But I have to say, at the moment, all of the rhetoric from Washington, the dominant group in Washington still remain the neocons. We've seen how incredibly influential they are, how whenever it's a question of making a decision about any subject, it's the neocons who always seem to win, how they always get the wars they want, how they always move from one disaster to the next.
It's because up to now, the U.S. hegemony over the world and therefore the financial system and our economy depends on all these wars we fight everywhere. Because the outcome might look terrible, but Iraq uses the dollar. Syria is dollarized. Libya, which we bombed into a civil war, and now there's slave markets over there. They use dollars as their currency. So on that aspect, we achieved the deep state, the Epstein class, achieved their aims in all those places. It kept them dollarized, and we can export our inflation to all those places. The three big, huge adversaries we've had to the U.S. world order is China, Russia, and Iran. Venezuela, yeah, it was a sideshow. Cuba is a sideshow. Venezuela may be a little bit more important because of its oil, but ultimately it's those three in close proximity that that the United States is trying to bring down. BRICS. They went after Russia through Ukraine, and they went after Iran directly, but they're failing in both places.
What I worry is that after this, assuming we end up with a kind of outcome where it would be seen as a US, well, maybe not a defeat or a retreat or a failure, call it whatever.
It will be, yes, it will be a defeat.
Nice word you want. What will probably more likely to happen is that the neocons will remain in control. They will say that we only lost because we weren't properly prepared, that it was a question of weak will, and they will also all blame it all on one individual, Donald Trump, who is made to be.
Now, that's, as far as the deep state is concerned, is one upside of this is the biggest thorn in their side. Donald Trump is going to be taken out by this war. And so that's they're going to be happy about that. That's probably the one upside for them.
Who's almost set himself up to be the scapegoat for this disaster.
Oh, yeah, just another fine.
Oh, yeah, they definitely set him up to be a scapegoat. It's easy to pin it on him because ultimately he gave the order. He let himself be tricked into this war. They went after him in so many different ways during his first term, but in the second term, the deep state got him. They got him to attack Iran. They got him. They got him to commit political suicide, and Trump took the bait, and he's finished. It's sad. He was a force against the Epstein class, the deep state, the rot that was in Washington. It's not an accident that Epstein and Weinstein both were brought to justice under his first term. That was an accident. I'm not saying he did it, but his administration didn't protect them. There was no call from the Justice Department telling prosecutors to back down from prosecuting Epstein. That didn't happen.
I know. Quick question. If Trump continues to escalate and continues this war, is this a Suez moment for the U.S.?
Well, yes. I mean, it could be. I mean, it could become that.
Exactly. That's my point. Yes, it can be very easily potential to become a Suez moment, completely exposing the limits of the U.S. power.
This gets long and drawn out.
I mean, U.S. weapon stockpiles are being quickly depleted by this war, and with China controlling rare earths, they're not easy to replenish. I mean, we're going to be weaker than ever for defending Taiwan. We're transferring air defenses from Japan, Korea, and Taiwan over to the Middle East and weakening our deterrence there.
If it gets long, that's the other thing. If it gets long and drawn out, then it will be a Suez moment for the United States. And I'll explain why.
And since I've been saying this is going to be long and drawn out, it cannot be a short war because Trump's position and the Iranian position are so different. So since it's going to be a long conflict, it's going to be a Suez moment for the United States.
Because more and more players, actors, countries around the world are going to say to themselves, well, we've worked within an American system on the basis, on an assumption of American power and American protection. And we can see that that power and that protection isn't there. So at some point, the Asians are going to start cutting deals with the Chinese and the Russians. I mean, that's coming. With the Japanese probably will want to start importing oil and gas from Russia. The South Koreans too. The Indians already are now importing oil from Russia again. They're coming to the Russians asking for fertilizer. Other countries in East Asia, Indonesia, for example, even the Philippines, will start to say to themselves, well, can we really afford to be in rivalry with China? Taiwan, apparently there's a pendulum swing of opinion there. They will start to say to themselves, well, maybe relying on the US isn't such a good idea. Maybe we need to sort ourselves out with China, with Beijing as well. Taiwan is in a particular crisis because they need helium to make their microchips. Where did they get the helium from? They got it from the Gulf.
The only other producer of helium is Russia.
It's not coming from the Gulf at the moment.
Only major producer.
Who is the only remaining big, reliable supplier of helium? It's the Russians. The Chinese too. So maybe we're going to have to start making deals with them. And other allies of the US, one can't assume that, well, perhaps forever. I mean, either way, I agree with your point about the European leaders. The European leaders are useless. They are making no...
They're basically U.S. puppets. I keep saying that. Not to the extent that the Gulf states are, but they are part of, let's say, the global elite that take their orders from Washington. That the reason they're extension of the U.S. deep state. The reason they're so anti-Ukraine is U.S. deep state is anti-Ukraine. Anti-Russia, and using Ukraine as a weapon against Russia. And so European countries parrot that because that's the global elite that the deep state has vast influence on. So I say Israel is part of the deep state in the Iran war. In the Ukraine war, all these rabidly anti-Russian European leaders are an extension of the U.S. deep state. In that regard, on that side.
No decisions at all here. They're not going to Washington and telling Trump this war has to end, which is what they should be doing. They're not seriously looking at easing sanctions on Russia. They're just continuing in the same way as always. But eventually, possibly, other European leaders might come up. They might say, look, the United States is unreliable, it's unpredictable, it's landed us all into this existential, terrible crisis. Again, the moment has finally come. But for our own survival...
By the way, Brussels, the EU itself, is under basically the thumb of the deep state. To the extent of Israel. Individual leaders are part of, let's say, the Epstein class. And like Starmer in UK has friends that were friends with Epstein, and you can see the connection there. And Brussels, yeah, it's definitely part of the U.S. hegemony. It's the way it undemocratically U.S. projects its power over Europe.
Rival, we have to start.
And just notice all the times in the last few years where Trump has just been able to bully Europe, whatever. It's because the amount of control the U.S. and the U.S. deep state has over Europe.
Talking and cutting deals with the other side. Now, is that sort of scenario?
And they need Trump to remain committed to Ukraine. And so Trump is allowed to, because he's done that, he's kept shipments of weapons until the Iran war going to Ukraine. He's been able to just bully European leaders because the deep state cares about Ukraine and is willing to give ground on practically everything else, including Greenland.
Shapes out. Then, of course, the United States risks international isolation because it's come to seen as a disruptor and a problem. And then it is a serious moment because an isolated power is no longer a global power. And that is, then we are justified about talking about a serious moment and an end to empire.
Thing is, it's still not going to be instantaneous. Switching currencies is a process that takes years, and places are only going to begin considering switching currencies from away from the U.S. dollar as this happens. And some places are going to introduce their own currencies, and it's de-dollarization is going to be a slow process. And and the United States is going to try to bully countries to not do it and do everything in its power to prevent de-dollarization. But as a few countries successfully de-dollarize, that's going to create inflation, big inflation in the U.S. dollar, which will encourage more countries to de-dollarize, which will fuel inflation even further, leading to the eventual collapse of the dollar and the financial system in the United States and our economy to a big extent. Sadly.
And a full stop in the most chaotic and for the United States disruptive way. And just to finish, putting aside issues of rare earths and other things, the other thing is that countries around the world, Japan, for example, need to import oil. They see skyrocketing prices, or even prices fall, but production falls even further. They need money. So what are they going to start to do? They start to sell off treasuries. And I've heard people talk.
Yeah, that's going to be one place that puts pressure on the U.S. Treasury market, but we don't. The United States never admits doing this, but we do. We go out to ask to other countries, say, don't sell our treasuries. We put pressure on them not to do that. And it used to be a lot more honest about that. There are articles back in the 1970s about Japan agreeing to U.S. requests to hold more foreign reserves and more treasury securities. And nowadays, it's never that open. The foreign central banks never admit they're bowing to U.S. pressure when they build up these insanely huge reserves of U.S. dollars and treasuries.
About this, that come the autumn, for example, if there's competition, global competition, and a scramble for not just oil, but naphtha, aluminium, fertilizer, all of those things, people are going to start to have to come up with money to buy these things at potentially elevated prices. They might start selling off their treasuries in order to come up with cash to buy these things.
Well, the next few years are going to be perhaps the most interesting time of our lifetimes. Probably, ultimately, even more interesting than 2008.
I'm not an expert in this. That's not a prediction. That's not my saying that is what is going to happen. But if we start getting that kind of fire sale of treasuries, because people have to sell them, they have to run down their investments. There was one.
But Alex here, sadly, he thinks that, as I used to when I was back when naive, that central banks could just act in the interest of their own countries. It does no. The U.S. pressure is going to slow this selling. And to the extent that people will be screaming at countries like, we have all these reserves, why don't you use them to secure the resources we need? And leaders in foreign countries are going to twist themselves into pretzels trying to explain why they're not doing it. We've seen in this happen so many times before. Countries do things that have seemed completely against their own interest, and coincidentally, it helps out the U.S. deep state.
Just one data point that I heard. No, it's not. It's not. I understand it's a fact. Where is all that money from the Gulf going to now? Money's pouring out of the Gulf because Dubai is collapsing, the UAE is collapsing. Once upon a time, it would have gone to the US. Now, apparently, the major destination is Hong Kong. Hong Kong used to get between $2 and $4 billion of capital inflow from the Gulf each month before this crisis began. They're now getting capital inflow from the Gulf at the rate of $40 billion a week. That gives you a sense.
All this capital inflow is still denominated in US dollars, though. That's still all euro dollar. Like, I talked about those bank accounts denominated in dollars outside the United States. Those euro dollar accounts. They're called euro dollars even if they're in Asia or Middle East. That's just the way it works. And so all the euro dollar accounts that were in the Middle East are being transferred to Hong Kong. But it doesn't affect the dollar's value because it's money that's in dollars being moved to somewhere else. It's also in dollars. It's when those dollars are converted to another currency or used to purchase gold that it starts to put huge pressure on the US dollar and United States dollar hegemony.
Of what is happening. So,
Are you serious?
I am absolutely serious.
Oh, crap.
Absolutely. So,
It's a huge deal.
a fire sale of treasuries. It's not.
But it's bad that that capital isn't fleeing to the United States, but it's still being held in dollar-denominated accounts. So it's not absolutely critical for the United States.
Impossible. I'm not predicting it. I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen. But there it is. If you let yourself get to that kind of position, then, as I said, a serious moment of the kind that Britain faced in 1956 is a possibility. It would not be the end of the United States. The United States could still...
Oh, I agree with that completely, by the way. Even in the worst-case scenario I'm talking about, this currency collapse, financial collapse, United States has some very valuable natural resources. It still has very educated and first-world population. It'll recover. Look at my example is look what happened in Russia. Russia collapsed after the Soviet Union. It was absolutely devastating. It was a very hard period for a few years there, but they pulled themselves together, and now they're a great power again. The same thing will happen in the United States. We will consolidate our military, but we'll still be a powerful military, but we just won't be as powerful as before, and our economy will revive itself. We will have manufacturing again in the United States, but there will be a 5 to 10 year period that will be really tough.
be galvanized by it, but it would be far more disruptive, far more difficult for the American people than if it were negotiated through.
Get out now, yeah. Negotiated, yeah. Negotiated.
Yes, if Trump was willing to throw away, fall on his sword and sacrifice himself to agree to Iranian demands, it would, maybe Republicans wouldn't lose the midterms. Global economy would be less impacted. Maybe the Strait of Hormuz could be opened. But Trump is finished if he does that, if he goes down that route. Politically finished, which is why it won't happen. Trump, he isn't, I don't think he's ready to do that type of thing. And besides, he's going to try this military thing, and after that, it might be even too late to try the diplomatic route. Anyway, this will be on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Come watch on Kick or Twitch. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.